Well, howdy, everybody. Here I am again, Randy Ray, the literate Texan, and I feel good today. I got a lot I want to talk about, and I hope you enjoy this because, like I said, I feel good today. I feel alive and like myself for the first time in about a year. So, when I used to sing karaoke at the bars on a regular basis, not only did everybody cringe when I got the mic, of course, because I'm the only person in the world who thinks I have a voice like an angel. The rest of y'all don't. But I would generally be pretty drunk. And sometimes when you drink a lot, you come up with little catchphrases to, that are easy to remember and stuff. So I would always say before or after a song, guys like me got to kick it old school. Of course, this video is about Star Trek. And so what does that have to do with the old school? Well, I'm planning my Star Trek reading for Booktrek this year, which is going to last for 3 whole months. It's a whole summer of Star Trek. And I am going to only read novels set during the original series era, because that's my Star Trek. That's what I grew up watching. Now, I did not grow up watching Star Trek when it originally aired in the 60s. I'm not that old. I was born in 1970. But I did grow up watching Star Trek on TV in syndicated reruns, and I absolutely loved it. Just like I love Twilight Zone, just like I love The Outer Limits, just like I loved Batman. These were shows that were before my time, but they really fired up my imagination. And I grew up reading a lot of Star Trek books. And it's funny because, especially in the 90s, I read Star Trek novels in the 90s too, as a younger man. And I realized how long ago some of this stuff was until I started putting together my to-be-read over 3 months Star Trek video. So here's what I'm reading over Booktrek, okay? And some of these are buddy reads with Steve Donahue, okay? Because he and I have been playfully arguing about the merits of a couple of novels, The Price of the Phoenix and The Fate of the Phoenix, since I first met him online. And so The Price of the Phoenix and The Fate of the Phoenix both came out in the 70s. And this was when a company called Bantam still owned the rights to do Star Trek novels, okay? So here's The Price of the Phoenix, okay? And then here is The Fate of the Phoenix. And I've read these before, okay? These are not good books, okay? In fact, here's a really weird thing. The Price of the Phoenix was actually a book I checked out of my school library. Not in 1977, but when I was old enough to read it, maybe 1982 or 1983 or something like that. And there was something really weird about it that I wasn't quite sure what it was, because I didn't know about slash fiction and stuff. And it was intentionally written to keep that sort of thing between the lines. But the idea behind, and I'm sure almost anybody watching this already knows, but in case you don't, the idea behind this slash fiction was that Kirk and Spock were more than just friends and crewmates. They were also lovers, okay? And so it's not subtle. If you're 13 years old, it might be subtle, but you're also thinking, that's kind of odd. And nothing wrong with that interpretation. I think you could even justify that interpretation by some of the stuff that happens on the show. Okay, great. But it's strictly in the realm of fan fiction at the time. But, Star Trek had been off the air almost 10 years in 1977. They didn't think they were going to make anything else with Star Trek, at the time. So they said, yeah, y'all do what you want with these books. It's just great. And so these are the first 2 books, okay, in my list of books that I'm going to read for Booktrek 2023. And these are buddy reads that I'll be doing with Steve Donahue. And these authors, Sandra Marshak and Myrna Culbreth, wrote 2 other novels. One was called The Prometheus Design. The other one is called Triangle. And these came later, and these were done when Pocket Books got the intellectual property license so that they could do Star Trek novels, and they held that license forever. And they put out all those numbered novels that you would see in the late 80s and early 90s. And those are some of the early ones. there was a little more editorial oversight of the pocketbook novels, especially after Star Trek the Motion Picture, because they realized they had a viable intellectual property that they could make money from that had a built-in audience. And they did, and have for a long time. So, during this same time period, late 1970s, early 1980s, Jack C. Haldeman II also wrote a Star Trek novel called Perry's Planet, which I have not read, okay? And you've probably heard the name Haldeman before because his younger brother was Joe Haldeman, who is a famous science fiction writer in his own right, in spite of Star Trek, you know. So I haven't read Joe Haldeman's Star Trek novels. I haven't read his brother's novel either, but it sounds interesting from what it says on the back. The Enterprise has picked up a strange disease from Perry's planet. And whatever this disease is, it can prevent you from committing violence. And of course, with Star Trek novels, Klingons are almost always the adversaries. That's not true in the Phoenix books. There's a supervillain named Omni in those books, and there's also Romulans. But in this book, of course, the Klingons, apparently they're immune to whatever this particular illness is. Anyway, short book, looks like a lot of fun, you know. And then the next set of books that I have start when pocketbooks took over. And the first one of these is the Klingon Gambit. And you can guess who the villains are in this one. But I like the name of the Klingon starship in this book. I haven't read it yet. I'm really looking forward to reading it. But the Klingon starship is named Terror. You got the Enterprise versus the Terror in this one. So I'm looking forward to reading that. And then the next one, I think that's number 3 in the series. The motion picture was number 1. I don't remember what number 2 was, but I think that's number 3 in the numbered series of novels, which are not canon, by the way. The next one is called The Covenant of the Crown, and it was written by Howard Weinstein. Okay, so I picked this up and saw that it was written by Howard Weinstein, and I thought, oh God, I didn't know he wrote Star Trek novels. That's crazy that he did that before he was a movie producer. And then I remembered it's not Howard Weinstein, it's Harvey Weinstein that was the guy in prison and stuff. Probably not even related. And from what I read online, when I read about Howard Weinstein, he's a well thought of science fiction author. So, you know, this one looks like fun, but guess who the villains are? Klingons. Next, I love the title on this one. This is number 12, okay? These are all in beautiful condition. My little collection here of Star Trek books from the original series are in beautiful condition. This one's called Star Trek, Mutiny on the Enterprise. On a mission of peace, a bewitching woman sets the Enterprise at war with itself. I don't know. Maybe there's I don't know. Sounds great to me. Then, next up is number 15, Star Trek Corona by Greg Bear. And I don't know how closely you've been looking at the cover art on these, but the style ranged pretty widely from cover to cover. To me, that doesn't even really look like Captain Kirk. His face is way too wide. I mean, it's like Captain Kirk if he had gained 100 pounds or something, which I think he eventually did. No offense to William Shatner, who I think is absolutely wonderful. But you know, and believe me, I realize that my face is big old round pumpkin. But anyway, looking forward to that one too. Then, and these books are all fairly short. You know, most of them don't even run 200 pages, 150 to 200 pages. So this next one seems a little longer. Crisis on Centaurus by Brad Ferguson, number 28. Enterprise to the rescue. Kirk must save both a planet and McCoy's daughter. So anyway, I think Dr. McCoy is just the most wonderful character on Star Trek. He's terrific. He's my favorite character. And I don't think he gets nearly enough screen time. And I thought DeForest Kelley was just amazing in that role. That fella in the J.J. Abrams movies who played him, he's one of my favorite actors. He's terrific as Dr. McCoy. He just nailed it. So looks like McCoy's going to have a big role playing that. And then, okay, so they're publishing these pocketbooks for a while, and they're coming out pretty regularly. I mean, in the 90s, they were publishing like 4 of these a year. Every 2 or 3 months, a new Star Trek, the original series novel would come out. And then, they started doing next generation novels too. And every series that they've had has had their own series of novels. But for whatever reason, they've slowed down the publishing of these novels. So you don't get them like you used to. Like, you'd be lucky to see 1 or 2 original series novels a year now. Of course, they've got a lot of other series to publish novels about. Even though I feel good, my mouth still gets really dry, and I apologize for that. But after a while, they're publishing these pocketbooks. They decide they're going to start publishing what they call giant Star Trek novels. And these are roughly twice the size of these pocketbooks that we've been reading, okay? And so I have, in hardcover, this was one of my favorite books in the 1990s when I first read it. I can't wait to revisit and see how I feel about it 30 years later. This is called Strangers from the Sky, and I have the hardcover edition here. And, of course, this was long before Star Trek First Contact. So there was nothing canon, really, about what our first contact with Vulcans was like. Or really about the founding of the Federation. So this book, as I recall, covers a lot of that material. And I really enjoyed it. I love the characters in the book that weren't traditional characters from the show. So anyway, this came out in 1987. I was still a teenager when this one came out. That's the first of the giant novels that I'm going to read for Booktrek this summer. I'm going to read 23 Star Trek books for Booktrek 23. So, the next one, another giant novel called Final Frontier. And this one's a really fun cover because if you notice, that's clearly William Shatner in the middle there. But it ain't James T. Kirk. That's George Kirk, James T. Kirk's father. Okay, so this story is about George Kirk serving on the Enterprise under Captain Robert April. And I guess he's written a diary or something that his son has found or whatever. I remember thinking this was a really solid novel when I first read it. But it does not have a lot to do with most of the crew of the Enterprise that we saw from the series. It's a whole different crew. And Robert April was a captain who had only appeared in an episode of the animated series. So they had a lot of fun fleshing him out, and also with the rest of the crew, because Kirk's father was kind of an enigma to us too. And I believe those are number 2 and number 3 in the giant novel series. There was a number 1, which I believe was called, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think the first of the giant novels in the giant novel series was Star Trek Enterprise, which was about the first mission of the Enterprise. It took place before season 1. Then we're going to move back to these pocketbooks, and this is number 40 in the series of pocketbooks. It's called Star Trek Time Trap, which is another great title. These titles are terrific. Captain Kirk is stranded in a strange new Klingon empire. Who would have guessed Klingons were going to be the bad guys? 100 years in the future. That's a high concept right there. Captain Kirk travels 100 years in the future to the Klingon empire. If you travel 100 years in the future, that's roughly corresponding to the Next Generation timeline too. So I'm real curious what that one's going to be like. Then, okay, we've got a trilogy here. And I read this when it came out. This is called Star Trek The Lost Years. It's another giant novel. And this one came out in 1989. And it tells the story of what happens to the crew between the end of the 5-year mission and the motion picture. I believe there were about 3 years, canonically, between the two. And this is the first book in a series set during the quote-unquote lost years. And I have those too. A Flag Full of Stars. And there's a Klingon right there on the cover of that one. And you got Kirk kind of in his movie Admiral uniform. So I'm looking forward to that. And then next up, we've got Star Trek Traitor Wins by L.A. Graff, the incredible third book in the best-selling Lost Years saga, which is also number 70 in the series. And I guess the trilogy was so good they decided to publish a 4th book, Star Trek Recovery, the final book in the best-selling Lost Years saga, number 73. And I love this cover because it's got that great shot of McCoy with his beard. I don't know if you remember, I don't know how long it's been since you've seen Star Trek the Motion Picture. When he shows up in Star Trek the Motion Picture, he's got a beard, and he's not excited about coming back into Starfleet. Star Trek the Motion Picture is a lot better movie than people give it credit for. I mean, it was directed by Robert Wise, who's just a legendary director. Also, during the same period, there is a novel, this is another one of the giant novels, called Star Trek Best Destiny, which is all about Kirk growing up to become a starship captain. And I think that cover art is really terrible, but I read this one once before, and I seem to remember it being pretty good. So I'm looking forward to dipping back into it. One of the nice things about Star Trek novels, too, is they just don't take a lot of time to read. They're just not that demanding mentally. So 23 Star Trek books over the course of the summer might sound like a lot, but like I say, most of these you can finish in an afternoon. And I'm almost finished, but I want to show you all of them, okay? This is number 72, Star Trek The Better Man, again by Howard Weinstein. And I guess this was published between books 3 and 4 of that Lost Years saga based on the numbering and stuff. So, and then it's another story about McCoy and a previously unknown daughter that has to be rescued. Go figure, how many daughters did McCoy have? Maybe he was a bigger ladies man than James Kirk. I wouldn't be surprised if that were the case, by the way. I don't know. And, okay, so this is another giant one, and this is a fun one. This is called Star Trek Federation, and I read this when it came out. It's about Judith and Garfield Reeves-Stevens, who are absolutely terrific. They understand the Star Trek canon better than just about anybody. And this is a book about the rise of the Federation. And obviously it came out a long time before Star Trek Enterprise did. But it's got Kirk and Picard on the cover, and there'd never been a crossover in any of these books between Kirk and Picard. Never. And so you buy this and you think they're finally going to get to meet. And this is clearly Kirk during the TV series era. So I'm not going to tell you any spoilers beyond that. But anyway, it's a fun book. I'm looking forward to revisiting it and seeing if I like it as much as I did last time. I should also mention, I'm buddies with Steve Donahue. Federation is one of his favorite Star Trek novels, and so is the one about the Vulcans, Strangers from the Sky. So, those are two of my favorite Star Trek books too. So even though we disagree about he'll tell you too, the Phoenix books aren't good books, but he likes them. I like them too, but in the same way that I like the movie The Room with Tommy Wiseau, it's fun to kind of laugh at them. So anyway, that was a really cool one. This is a really cool novel here too. This is number 80. This is called Star Trek The Joy Machine, a novel by James Gunn. This is not the James Gunn who directed Guardians of the Galaxy. This is James Gunn, the science fiction writer, based on the story by Theodore Sturgeon. I really like Theodore Sturgeon. He's a great writer. Theodore Sturgeon wrote The Joy Machine with the intention of it being an actual episode of Star Trek. And in terms of reading novels that felt like actual episodes of Star Trek, I've yet to read one that felt more like an episode of the original series than The Joy Machine. Looking forward to revisiting that one too. Most of these aren't rereads, but there are a few. All right, so next up. Those of you who've watched my channel know that I recently read a novel set in the Shatnerverse called The Return, which is the second book in the Shatnerverse series, which was actually mostly written by Judith and Garfield Reeves-Stevens, but they didn't necessarily get their names on the cover. And so this is a book in that series called Specter. And you see Spock with a goatee in the background. So that's a big hint that the mirror universe is going to be part of this book, okay? So apparently, James T. Kirk's retired again, and he's in love with a woman that he's married to. He's got a son, and then something comes up, and it has to do with Voyager. And they return, and Picard and them seem to need some help, so, they got to go to Kirk because Kirk's so much more competent in this series than anybody else in the Star Trek universe, which is part of the charm of the series, is that, he's always at odds with them, okay? And he's always right, and they always end up looking like a bunch of bunch of idiots in the next generation, which, I'm sure that's based, Shatner had ideas and input in the series of novels. Anyway, I don't remember that much about it other than it involved the Mirror Universe, but there was a whole Mirror Universe trilogy in the Shatnerverse. And anyway, I found this one cheap. It's in good condition. I'm looking forward to reading it. They do a good job of capturing the voice of William Shatner on the page, I feel like, too. Like, if I didn't know he had ghostwriters, I might think, well, Shatner probably really did write this. All right, so I've got a trilogy of books here, and that's it. This is the end of it, okay? This trilogy of books here is called the Crucible Trilogy. And the Crucible Trilogy was there to celebrate some anniversary. And most of the trilogy, and I haven't read the whole trilogy, I've just read the first 2 books, stems from the greatest episode of Star Trek ever, The City on the Edge of Forever by Harlan Ellison. One of these days I'm going to make a video about my letter that I got from Harlan Ellison, but not tonight. But, okay, so in The City on the Edge of Forever, McCoy runs into the past and changes history, okay? And so that means there's a whole alternate timeline that leads up to that point where the Starship Enterprise no longer exists, which means that McCoy, who traveled back in time, must have lived out his entire life on Earth starting during the 30s during this time. And that's that's the premise of this novel. What was McCoy's life like in that alternate universe? And this is called Crucible McCoy, Providence of Shadows. And I distinctly remember reading this when it came out and thinking it was absolutely terrific. I loved it. Now, I think there was some controversy about this because, I don't know, not everybody on this that's watching me, but a lot of people who are watching me probably know a little bit about Harlan Ellison, and he was notoriously litigious. And I think, he stirred up some legal trouble because they created these ancillary storylines based on concepts from an episode that he had written, and he was supposed to be compensated for it. And I think he got some money out of the deal. I don't know. I just enjoyed the books. Excuse me. The next book is called Crucible Spock, The Fire and the Rose. And I do remember reading this and not liking it as well as I liked McCoy, but I did like it very much. And it has to do with Spock deciding whether or not the Kolinar is for him. And I don't know if you remember in the Star Trek The Motion Picture, Spock's been preparing himself for the Kolinar, and it's a Vulcan ceremony which eliminates all emotions and leaves you as a creature of total logic. And so, that's the whole story about Spock. Data's got his whole story. He's Pinocchio. He wants to be a real boy. Spock has his whole story. Is he a human or a Vulcan or both? And how does he straddle that line? And this is another book that goes to the core of his character. And finally, the third book in the trilogy, I did not read. It is called Crucible Kirk, The Star to Every Wandering. By the way, these were all written by David R. George III. This is the 23rd book in the 23 books I'm going to read for Booktrek 2023. And this one is about Captain Kirk, who was arguably more affected by the events of The City on the Edge of Forever than anybody, because he fell in love with a woman in the past. Nope, not going to spoil the episode if you haven't seen it. You should see it because Joan Collins is in it, and it's wonderful from start to finish. Absolutely terrific. And I guess it's a lot different than what Ellison had originally written. And there's a comic book version of Ellison's original version out there that you can watch too. And it's one of the things that he and I discussed in our correspondence when I wrote him a letter back in 1989. So not only was I really young yet, I wasn't even old enough to drink beer, but hell, Ellison was pretty young then too. So, and that is my video about Booktrek. I'm really excited about getting started on June 1st. The way I figure it, there's going to be about 12 weeks this summer, 13 weeks. So I really only need to read a couple of Star Trek books a week to get all 23 of them in. It's not going to be the only thing I'm reading. Certainly, I'm doing a buddy read of Lonesome Dove for Juno on the Range with my friend, the Evening Reader. And then, some of these Star Trek books I'm doing is buddy reads with Steve Donahue. I'm motivated to read more because of these booktube events and things like buddy reads. So if you're ever interested in doing something like that, or it is possible I've committed to doing a buddy read with you and forgotten about it. And I'm going to blame the medication on that. But the reason that I'm so lively tonight is I'm off the meds for just a little while and I'm enjoying my respite from that. Because honestly, I feel like myself for the first time in a year and it's absolutely terrific. I'm just loving it. Anyway, so grateful to you for watching, especially if you made it this long. 25 minutes is a long video to talk about Star Trek books. But I mean, I had a lot of Star Trek books to talk about, didn't I? 23 of them. And I know some of y'all are going to tell me in the comments I should broaden my horizon. You know, and maybe I will. I've been trying to find a copy of Imzadi that's in good shape because I understand that's the best of the Next Generation novels. So I may read that. And I've read some of the much, much newer novels, the more recent ones that came out. There were 2 for the Picard series that I've read. And then there's one coming up soon for Strange New Worlds. Absolutely terrific show, by the way. Yeah, they finally took Star Trek back to its roots and made a Star Trek show where they explore strange new worlds. And people really liked it. Who would have thought that was a winning formula? Thanks for watching. I'll be back soon.